I was thinking, why is it the teams that are always lovable losers have light blue? You got the Cubs, you got the Lions. And then I remembered that the Lions finished higher in the division than us this year. I hate the world. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Lombardi Time Brews. I'm your host, John Del Rey. Yes, today we're continuing with our division series. Today, we're heading over to Detroit. We're looking at the Detroit Lions. So I do have a couple notes of Packer news. Of course, yesterday, if you were following along with Brian Gutekunst's couple different press conferences yesterday, one with the local media, one national, some headlines certainly came from that. In addition, Aaron Rodgers was on a podcast this morning where he talked about his darkness retreat. I'll talk about the football relevant bits of that pretty quick. So just a few Packers notes, and then we're diving into the Detroit Lions offseason and what they got going on. I mean, the Detroit Lions finished a surprising 9-8 this year, second in the division, and they've got a lot of pieces to continue this ascension. They got a lot of continuity, but at the same time, they've got some pretty valuable free agents who may be walking out the door. So we're going to highlight all of that. So thanks for joining me here on Lombardi Time Brews. I'm so thankful that you're choosing to spend a little bit of your time here with me today. Let's cover those Packers notes first. First of all, in regards to the salary cap, Kenny Clark just experienced a contract restructure. Now, his was, I believe, a max void restructure. They did as much as they could. They shifted a bunch of money around, opened up basically $11 million in cap. That puts them right now at $16.5 million available on their cap. But here's the thing. Yeah, they're cap compliant. Yes, now they've got a little bit of space. They still need more. Their draft is going to cost them about $12 million. If Aaron Rodgers is traded, that's going to cost about $9 million. They still have to tender Yash, which is expected to be about $4 million. And then anyone else that they need to re-sign, go sign, etc. So already, that 16.5 is already gone, and you're back in the hole once March 15th hits if you do those couple of things. So they need more space. And Brian Gutekunst was asked yesterday, what's the status of some of these other veteran contracts? How are the Packers going to get more space? And he did say that one of the things that they're working on is David Bakhtiari's contract. Now, a few things. Kenny Clark experienced a contract restructure. Basically just means that they moved some money around, pushed some stuff into the future, converted it from one bonus type to another bonus type, and just they pushed it forward, right? Kenny Clark, because of the way that they pushed it forward, because of the way that his contract is set up, because they've pushed so much over the last couple of years forward, he may still get a contract extension next offseason. You know, there were some talks recently about whether Kenny Clark would be getting a contract extension this offseason, getting that illustrious third contract in Green Bay. But we know now, per this restructure, it's looking more likely that that may occur next year. Well, Brian Gutekunst made note that they're talking to David Bakhtiari, that they're working on that contract. And if it were just a restructure like Kenny Clark's, you don't really need player consent to do that. You're just moving money around, you're adding void years. Guys don't necessarily have to agree to that. So what's there to work on if they're just doing a restructure? But if they're working out any type of extension, which I would think is fairly unlikely for David Bakhtiari, or like in Aaron Jones's case, if they're working on a pay cut, that would be something that David Bakhtiari would have to agree to. Or it's just in a holding pattern until they see what's going on with Aaron Rodgers. But Brian Gutekunst said at his initial after the season press conference that he certainly is expecting David Bakhtiari back. And David Bakhtiari himself has been in different interviews talking about how change is inevitable. He doesn't sound as tied to Aaron Rodgers as other Packers may be. So are we talking pay cut? Are we talking about a structure that needs his permission? Something. But either way, expect that contract to get altered in some manner. We know that releasing him only frees up just short of $6 million. You don't cut an all-world left tackle, even if he only gives you 9 games a year to save $6 million. So he's sticking around. If he is gone, it's not because of cap savings. So that means they're doing something else. Something else is being looked at with that contract. So now we just wait and find out. Other highlights from Brian Gutekunst's press conferences: Mason Crosby, he talked glowingly about Mason and hoping to retain him, so it certainly sounds like Mason Crosby will be re-signed and will be a Packer again. He talked about the secondary and how that's going to need to be addressed in free agency and the draft. He talked about Rasul Douglas and how Rasul Douglas has the capacity and the skill set to switch to safety. So I think that dream's actually coming alive. He mentioned that a number of their free agent safeties will not be returning, in which case it's Adrian Amos, Rudy Ford, and Dallin Leavitt. I mean, we already expected Adrian Amos to walk, so this is fairly expected news, right? But to hear Brian Gutekunst say it, it's kind of a new level of confirmation. But then, of course, all of the headlines, and I'm only going to talk about this for a minute, Aaron Rodgers, right? We know that he has emerged from the darkness. We know he just did a podcast that released this morning where he talked about what being in the darkness was like and how you brush your teeth and how you go to the bathroom and all that kind of stuff. But he did talk about football, too. And he said that in the podcast, this was Aaron Rodgers, he talked about how he touched on, in his thoughts, he touched on retirement, he touched on continuing to play. And he said that he entered the darkness with this fear around retirement, this apprehension, this anxiety. And he emerged with this calmness. Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't also say that he did talk about having a number of factors that would motivate him if he decided to keep playing as well. So he really did, I don't want to say talked out of both sides of his mouth, but he continued to entertain both ideas. And he said that a decision would be coming soon. If you want my personal opinion, my guess as of yesterday, my guess, and don't skewer me if I'm wrong, no one knows what's freaking going on, but my guess is we're looking at retirement. Yeah, I think if there's anyone in the world who doesn't care about walking away from $60 million because he's already sitting on a $350 million fortune, it's Aaron Rodgers. I think he's proven that. If there's anyone who, like, I also don't think, I see it all the time still, that, like, he's not going to retire. He'd have to share a stage with Brady. I don't think he gives a crap. I really don't. I know he's a very, like, prideful person. I don't think he cares. My money, my bet right now is that Aaron Rodgers is going to feel uncomfortable returning to the Packers because it's clear they want to move on. And he also can't see himself playing in another uniform. So he retires. And he's at peace with that. And he doesn't blame the Packers for it. That's my guess as of today. Check back in 20 minutes. Could be totally different. But as of today, that's my guess. Now, to go along with that, Brian Gutekunst at his presser yesterday, of course, was asked about Aaron Rodgers, and he said, the question was, do you want Aaron Rodgers to be your starting quarterback? And he goes, yeah, those are things we're going to have to talk about. That was not a ringing endorsement, right? I've talked a lot on this channel about how, like, this year is different. This year, you've got Mark Murphy at the NFL Awards who's just talking about the deadline. He's not talking about how we worship the ground that Aaron Rodgers walks on and we want him back like we've seen in past years. You're not seeing Brian Gutekunst every single opportunity he has talking about how we want Aaron Rodgers back. If he comes back, it's his job. He's not saying that anymore. Now he's saying stuff like, yeah, those are conversations we're going to have. We know what Aaron's capable of, and, we're going to talk to him. That is a lot different. And then he was asked about Jordan Love, and he goes, Jordan Love is ready to be a starting quarterback in the NFL. His statements about Jordan Love were more declarative than his ones about Aaron Rodgers. And if you really, really want Aaron Rodgers back, I'm not sure that that's how you talk. All right. Let's move on. We're talking Detroit Lions. Yeah, that's right. The 9-8 Detroit Lions finished second in the division, of course, beating Green Bay in the final week of the season to keep them out of the playoffs. Look, the Detroit Lions are an ascending team. Question is their ascension sustainable? Can they get a defense to match their offense? Let's dive into the numbers. The 9-8 Detroit Lions last year put up 26.6 points per game. That was good for fifth in the NFL. That is an elite offense. Rushing yards per game was 128.2. That's 11th in the NFL. Passing yards per game, 251.8. Good for 8th in the NFL. On the defensive side, you got a tale of two cities here, because as good as the offense was, the defense was equally as bad, if not worse. And they did get better towards the end of the year. I'm going to give that credit where it's due, but still, looking at total season stats, the Detroit Lions gave up 25.1 points per game. That's tied for 30th in the NFL. The defensive rushing yards per game allowed was 146.5. That's 29th in the NFL. Yards passing per game, 245.8. That's 30th in the NFL. So points tied for 30th, rushing 29th, passing 30th. Ouch. Now, you want to look at the third spectrum of football, and I realized I didn't really talk about this much with Chicago, but I looked up Rick Gosselin's special teams rankings, where the Packers jumped from 32nd to 22nd. We were willing to throw a parade. The Detroit Lions rank 6th in that ranking. This is a very well-rounded football team that basically, if it can get a defense, is a legitimate contender if their success is sustainable, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. Let's take a look at the head coaching, the coaching staff on the whole, the general manager. Did any changes occur there? Well, teams tried. Teams tried to lure offensive coordinator Ben Johnson away, but instead, the Detroit Lions were able to retain him, and he stayed in Detroit, saying that they're building something special, and he wants to stick around. So for the coaching staff, you still have head coach Dan Campbell, offensive coordinator Ben Johnson, defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn, and general manager Brad Holmes. They also recently added former Chicago Bears head coach John Fox to be a senior defensive consultant, a very becoming more and more trendy gig in the NFL for these old defensive coordinators and head coaches who still want to hang around but don't want the full grind, so they just, they're consultants. So John Fox now doing that for Detroit. What transactions have already been done? Only one for the Detroit Lions thus far. They released their defensive tackle, Michael Brockers. He'd been injury-plagued the last couple of years, wasn't super impactful in the games that he played in this year, so they released him and they opened up about $10 million in cap space doing so. But here's the deal with the Detroit Lions, and I'm going to give you the numbers first, then I'll list off the names. They have a bunch of free agents this year, including some guys that are pretty big deals on the team, including former Packer Jamal Williams, DJ Chark, a bunch of defensive players. So, all told, here's the deal. The Detroit Lions currently heading into free agency right now. Doesn't mean that they're officially going to be free agents. The Detroit Lions could still re-sign a number of these players, but the truth is, as of right now, they have arguably 5 or 6 defensive starters that are going to become free agents, and another 2 or 3 on offense. Now, the good thing for Detroit is their offense is staying predominantly the same, assuming they can retain. Their defense, which needs to be overhauled, is the one that's losing a lot more snaps, a lot more games, and more starters. All told, the offensive side of the ball is losing 3,011 snaps this year. The defense losing 5,561. Now again, those numbers are accurate if every single free agent leaves. But still, right now you got to operate under the assumption that 5,561 defensive snaps for the Detroit Lions could be walking out the door. 3,000 on offense. Those are huge numbers and a lot of players to replace. Who are the players that could potentially be leaving? Who are the players that don't have contracts right now? Here's the list, and it's lengthy. DJ Chark, wide receiver. Jamal Williams, running back. Mike Hughes, cornerback. Alex Anzalone, inside linebacker. Evan Brown, offensive guard. Chris Board, linebacker. Jerron Davis, linebacker. Josh Woods, linebacker. Deshaun Elliott, safety. Nate Sudfeld, backup quarterback. Justin Jackson, backup running back. Isaiah Buggs, defensive lineman. Packer fans should remember Isaiah Buggs. He's the one that was constantly getting called out in that end-of-season loss to the Detroit Lions for completely decimating the Packer run game. So remember that name. They also have Will Harris, cornerback, Dan Skipper, offensive guard, Austin Bryant, edge, Matt Nelson, offensive tackle, John Kaminsky, edge D-line, Amani Oruye, cornerback. Sorry, I don't know how to pronounce all Detroit Lions names. I'm sorry. But he's a cornerback. He's a free agent. Benito Jones is an exclusive rights free agent. Tommy Kramer, exclusive rights free agent. Brock Wright, their starting tight end, exclusive rights free agent. Scott Daly, exclusive rights free agent. Anthony Pittman, exclusively rights free agent. And Bobby Price, a restricted free agent who plays corner. That's a list, y'all. Now, the biggest names on there, of course, DJ Chark, wide receiver, played in 11 games this year for them, logging a 69.6 PFF grade in the games that he did play wide receiver. Jamal Williams, former Green Bay Packer, of course, appeared in all 17 games, played 459 snaps, 17 rushing touchdowns, I believe, off the top of my head. A great year for Jamal Williams, now free agent. Looking at the secondary, The defensive side of the ball, they got Will Harris, free agent. Deshaun Elliott, free agent. Mike Hughes, free agent. That's 3 of arguably their top 5 secondary players. Maybe 6, depending on how you really want to split it. That's a major impact. Or Alex Anzalone, their inside linebacker, started every game for this year, logging almost 1,100 snaps. It's a lot of talent. But again, in the case of the Detroit Lions, are you looking for that defensive talent to hopefully leave? Maybe. When looking at Sport Track for the dollar valuations they're expecting some of these players to get, they're expecting Jamal Williams to get a contract of about $4 million a year. DJ Shark about $9.5. Evan Brown, offensive guard, they're projecting him for $10.8 million a year. Deshaun Elliott, their safety, projecting him for about $10 million a year. So if the Detroit Lions are looking to retain all these guys, it's going to have a heavy cost. What are the biggest issues on the Detroit Lions? How can they ascend from 9-8, barely not making the playoffs, to being a bona fide contender and taking this relatively weak and transitionary NFC North division? Well, the biggest problem spots in the team, you could easily say, are cornerback, defensive line, linebacker, so all 3 phases of your defense. Then on the offensive side of the ball, realistically tight end, since they traded away TJ Hockenson to the division rival Minnesota Vikings. Really? Number 1 issue to address? Defense. Defense. All of it. Defense. More. Like, they need playmaking. They just need everything. Look, I mean, there's no other way to say it. And I know that sounds overly simplistic, but the defense was really bad. And yes, it got better towards the end of the season, especially the performance of Mike Hughes and Will Harris, the cornerbacks, but they're both free agents. Deshaun Elliott, you've got one of your brighter, younger players on defense, is a free agent. Isaiah Buggs, one of your better run stuffers, is a free agent. Michael Brockers, your other run stuffer, is a free agent. And this is a lot of guys that, even the ones you like, even the ones that you felt like performed well in the defense, are suddenly free agents. And so all you're really left with is a bunch of the guys that maybe need improvement outside of Agent Hutchinson. Jeffrey Okudah's getting better. Walker, your other safety, is pretty good. But about half of the players that you look at on this roster and say, well, yeah, that's the players you want to build the defense around, are suddenly free agents. And so you got questions here. Can the defense stack up to the offense? Speaking of the offense, how much of that talent are you going to retain? Evan Brown leaving on the offensive line probably isn't that massive of a loss. He looks replaceable in their depth. Okay, fine. I mean, we know that the offensive line at the end of the year was ranked as the 8th best offensive line in football per PFF. And Evan Brown was realistically probably the weakest of the 5. So him walking out, okay, maybe you can even upgrade that spot. Get yourself a better offensive line, because one thing you know about Detroit is that offensive line is good. Okay, well, what about the other players? DJ Shark, free agent, unlikely to be retained because of the dead money that's already on the cap. Well, Jameson Williams is going to play a lot more this year. He could probably replace Shark, right? But do you have enough offensive firepower between Amon-Ra St. Brown, Khalif Raymond, and Jameson Williams? Is that enough at wide receiver to continue being this top 5 offense? Or how about quarterback Jared Goff? Jared Goff turned in one of the best years of his career with offensive coordinator Ben Johnson. Good enough to the tune of 4,438 yards, 29 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. And he had by far the most success running the play action, where 16 of his 29 touchdowns were performed on play action plays. Is that sustainable? Does it continue being sustainable if Jamal Williams isn't retained in free agency? And you're running more play action with Swift or a rookie? And not to mention the fact that Jared Goff has, he's had one other year in his career like this for the Rams, and then the next couple of years were shaky. I know Detroit is kind of evaluating, is he the long-term guy? Or do we need to bring in competition for him? And for sure, you're not bringing in an outright quarterback competition this year, but further down the road. Because the question is Jared Goff, this guy, 29 touchdowns, 7 picks, uber efficient? Or is he the other guy that we saw with the Rams, much more turnover heavy? It's a legit question, one that has to be answered if the Detroit Lions truly want to ascend to being a contender. So, here are your questions. How do they address it? What resources do they have? Well, right now they got about $23 million open in cap. But a lot of that is going to be taken up by their draft, because they've got a pretty expensive draft. and maybe retaining any of these guys. This is a team that's, like the Packers, going to have to create some more space if they want to keep this nucleus together. Here are their draft picks, and I said it's going to be a pretty expensive draft, and the truth is, it's all in these picks. Round 1, pick 6. Round 1, pick 18. Round 2, pick 48. Round 2, pick 55. Round 3, pick 81. Round 5, pick 154. Round 6, pick 183. Round 6, pick 194. And no projected compensatory picks for the Detroit Lions. Look, this is a team that's ascending, and it's fun. I mean, this Detroit Lions team is fun. They've got wonderful personality, a head coach who I love, who seems like a true leader of men. But is their success sustainable? Did they potentially overachieve this year by getting career performances from a number of players that you can't bank on year in and year out? So how do the Detroit Lions as a franchise ensure that the growth that they experience this year continues on an upward trajectory and doesn't stall out because they're already getting the maximum amount of ability? You know the key players that they need to retain. You know the spots on the field where they need a talent infusion, and they got the picks to do it, but is that going to result in immediate success this year? Because $23 million in cap as of right now isn't a ton. Questions abound for the Detroit Lions. What we can say is that this team is on an upswing, but how sustainable is that swing? Thanks so much for joining me on Lombardi Time Brews. I hope you're having a great day. I'll be back on Friday with my offseason preview of the Minnesota Vikings. Of course, assuming there's no massive news about a certain quarterback for the Green Bay Packers. If that's the case, I'll either do an emergency episode or I'll kick the Minnesota Vikings into next week, maybe Monday. Who knows? Every day for a Packer fan right now is just day by day, minute by minute. Let's see whatever news we get. Thanks for devoting a little bit of time here to Lombardi Time Brews. Hope you're having a great day. And as always, go Pack Go.